Hello and welcome. We are now joining CTIR On Air. Let's bring all the other people in so I'm not the only person talking here. Woohoo. All right, great. All right, so let's look around this room. Who do we have? This is Cisco Talos Incident Response. Not all of us, just some of us. So we're here to talk about what the trends Cisco Talos Incident Response, aka CTIR, has observed in quarter one. So quarter one, we're not using fiscal calendars because that makes my head hurt. So we're talking about January to March 2022. Before I introduce our lovely panelists, quick rundown of what CTIR is, in case you don't know. We are the customer-facing incident response team for Cisco and Cisco Talos. So it is a conglomeration of forensic analysts, experts, and threat intelligence experts, and we're here to help customers on their worst day. I'm just going to go how I see people in my screen. So starting off with Alexis Merritt. She is one of our incident response consultants / analysts. We have Lori Varner, who has the glorious title of incident commander. Yeah, that's kind of badass. And then we also have Caitlin Huey, who is one of our Talos research engineers. So welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. If you want to follow along, the information that we will be talking about is available at blog.talosintelligence.com. And on there, you can find this report as well as all sorts of information about our team and what we do here. So Alexis, I would like you to just do a quick introduction, who you are, what you do, and maybe something that you're into that's not cybersecurity.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Hey there, I'm Alexis Merritt. So I'm one of the incident response consultants at CTIR. So what that kind of sort of means is that I work in conjunction to the incident commanders as well as other consultants on my team to provide forensics examination and timelines, and as well as recommendations at the end of different investigations. So when I'm not showing up for our customers on, say, their like worst business days and career days, I'm probably outside, mostly backpacking. I really enjoy completely unsubscribing from the normal day to day and spend time like just memorized by nature. Like it's only April 28th and I already have my like outdoor sandals tan.
Nice. All right, Lori, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lori. I'm an incident commander here at CTIR, and I work with Alexis, Caitlin, and Liz day in and day out, again, on sometimes on company's worst day, but also on a lot of fun activities like tabletop exercises and cyber range services. When I'm not doing all that, I like to golf, hitting the links after this podcast, and fishing.
Yes, and so Lori gets to do that. We're not going to disclose her location, but she is in a place that has lots of beaches and sun. So that is also why it's very dark where she is. And so, yeah, let's move on to Caitlin. Hey, Caitlin.
Hey everyone, I'm Caitlin. I'm on the Cisco Talos Threat Intelligence and Interdiction team, TI&I, specifically the strategic analysis team under TI&I. We conduct and support threat hunting and telemetry sources, as well as focus on strategic products that examine and report on threats and trends that are occurring over a period of time. I guess for a hobby, you might say that I play a lot of board games. I recently played a remake of a 1980s board game, The Dark Tower. The coolest part of the game is that there's like an almost 2
Did you find all the pieces? Oh my God, I loved that game. So Dark Tower, for those of you who don't know, like it was the coolest like technology in the 80s because it literally has a dark tower.
Oh yeah, it takes up the whole table. It's like a 2-foot tall electronic tower, and the coolest part of it is it just glows red and spits out skulls at you. It's a blast. I've never won the game yet. I'll let you know when I do. I just have consistently lost it, but it's a blast.
It's the journey.
It's the journey. Yep.
It's the journey. Yeah, those things, finding those intact is a very difficult endeavor. So kudos on you for finding that. Should probably tell you who I am. So my name is Liz Waddell. I am the practice lead for Talos Incident Response. I am also a Beers with Talos co-host, and you can find me all over, apparently, the internet this week. I'm sorry. So this week, what we're going to do right now is we're going to talk about those trends that were published, like I said, on blogs.talosintelligence.com. talosintelligence.com. And we're going to start off with our top trend. To get to our top trend, I'm going to tell you a really stupid joke. All right. How did the criminals get away? They just ransomware. That's right. It is, once again, no shock to us at all. The top trend of this quarter is still ransomware. We actually saw the percentage of that go down, but that's just because of math. We just had more incidents that had log4j in it, and it took it down, but it's still about 25%. So still most of the incidents that we are investigating have to do with either pre-ransomware or ransomware, where those criminals are just running off. So let's talk about some of the families that we've been seeing. Obviously, some of our old friends, they're still hanging around. Hive is still there. And of course, our much in the news friend Conti. Alexis, I know that you were doing an investigation that involved Conti, a ransomware, and there were some interesting things that were happening during the encryption. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, of course. So we saw instances of Conti ransomware using scheduled tasks to deploy their binaries. So of course that would be pushing out scheduled tasks through a mass deployment with your GPO. With these scheduled tasks, your security operations team could think they've, deleted malicious binaries from a host and just to have those binaries show back up again because the scheduled task is ran, every 30 minutes or on startup, or whatever other parameters are being set up by the adversary. So because of this, it's definitely a choice by adversaries to use for a persistent mechanism, as well as just to continue to be there and push it out. Some things to consider to defend against it, of course, is, monitor for net new content executing from the service host executable, or monitoring those newly constructed scheduled jobs with Microsoft event logging.
Fantastic. All right, so we have the old friends. Let's talk about the new friends. And I think this is also just a trend where, the diversification of ransomware, right? And we're seeing, many new families pop up or things that are just coming into the fold. So, Caitlin, we saw some new families this quarter. We saw Cerber, Intraby, Cuba. Anything interesting about those guys?
Yeah, so I think it is important to say that no family was observed more than once in incidents that closed out this quarter, sort of a trend that we've been seeing the past few quarters towards a greater democratization of ransomware actors. What is interesting about a couple of the ransomware families that we did observe is that while initial access may have been difficult to determine for some of these, there were strong evidence pointing to possible exploitation attempts of vulnerable and public-facing applications to gain initial access. So in the case of the Cuba ransomware engagement, I believe CTIR observed exploitation attempts against Microsoft Exchange server related to proxy shell. So that's a chain of vulnerabilities affecting some versions of on-premises Microsoft Exchange servers, initially released, I believe, in September 2021 as a remote code execution security flaw. Cuba is increasingly shifting to exploiting Exchange bugs such as proxy shell and proxy logon as initial infection vectors. In the server ransomware incident, we observed the adversary leveraging vulnerabilities in GitLab to upload and execute code remotely, ultimately gaining unauthorized access. So the adversary then attempted to expand access through privilege escalation and lateral movement, ultimately executing the ransomware. That activity was interesting because it was consistent with reporting from December 2021 on server ransomware targeting Confluence as well as GitLab servers with just older RCE vulnerabilities.
Yeah, the fact that those were older. So are they particularly looking for things that they just thought people hadn't patched in the past? Like, why are they going so far back in those vulnerabilities?
That's a good question. I think because there is success. I think because there are unpatched servers. I think they are finding success in just conducting vulnerability scans and then just finding these vulnerable servers to then just gain a foothold. Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think, the fact that vulnerability is so old does point to, one, at this time you should have patched your system, but also probably there is a legacy system sitting somewhere in somebody's environment that they're afraid to do patching on because they're afraid that it's going to take down whatever it's at. And it's certainly something that we see as a challenge within our industry. One other thing just to note about ransomware before we move on to our next topic is, as more of these ransomware groups are being exposed, things that have happened with, like Conti's, the Conti leak and all those things, that means there's going to be shifting, their TTPs, right? So that may make them more difficult to detect, but that means, having that defense in depth is going to be really, really important to you. So making sure that you're not only monitoring your endpoint, but also your network and looking for things that are anomalies within your environment. So let's talk about our next trend. Our next trend, the initial vector trend. And it's a word that I am very tired of saying, and that is log4j. Maybe I'll go back and start calling it log4j now. Like maybe this is the time log4j comes back, because I'm tired of saying this word. But not surprising to any of us, log4j became one of our top initial entry vectors. We saw it a lot as a initial vector for crypto mining, which is something that's not unexpected when a new exploit gets into the wild. It's something we've often seen, but we even saw multiple crypto mining groups on the same endpoint, which is just ouch, man. That hurts. That's a little painful there. We do know that, in January, NHS released their report about the mass exploitation of VMware Horizon servers. And Lori, I know you saw some of this come up in your investigations. Any idea why, that log4j patch came out? So why were the VMware Horizon servers still being affected by this? Why was that still an avenue for the adversary?
Because people weren't patching. So plain and simple. I know, in the beginning there was kind of a workaround, but that is now obsolete. You need to patch. That's where we're seeing we're still seeing a lot of it, and folks have not patched, and that's where they're jumping in and getting that foothold into the network.
So, Alexis, I know you have a very strong opinion about this. Would you like to get on your soapbox for just a minute about this?
Oh, about patching, or?
Yes, about patching.
Yeah, so what we've kind of been seeing, right, is like ambulance chasing, a big exploit happens, and then the whole community comes together and builds out either workarounds to the point of what Lori just said, or the system itself whoever's holding the program builds out a patch or new patches. But what happens is after that, like, the lights and the stars and the show stops, they're still pushing the new patches or pushing like the official, like, hey, this is what we should do. Because, our researchers and stuff, they're working really hard in the first 30 days, but they're still working after that to continue making it obsolete for the adversaries to use. But your defenders aren't necessarily going back and reading like the new documentation or the new patch updates and pushing those. So then we just see same old tricks by the adversary groups. But I'll get off that box.
No, but I think it's an important box to stand on, at least for a second, right? And it's this idea when we see things like, Log4j, SolarWinds, or Hafnia, Microsoft Exchange Server, when we see a big vulnerability come out, you have to keep on that intelligence, because new things are going to be coming in. And often that first patch was just the first patch. There will be a second, a third, a fourth, or other things that come up, or maybe you just stop using Java. I don't know. There are certain ways that you can go for this, but that is definitely, I think, an important point to make. All right, one last thing on Log4j. Actually, it probably won't be the last, but one last thing on this topic. Caitlin, were there any notable adversaries or threat actors we saw using Log4j?
Yeah, so we continue to see a range of threat actors and post-exploitation activities leveraging Log4j as a means of initial infection, for sure. This is moving beyond just the deployment of various cryptocurrency miners and web shells. For example, CTIR identified strong evidence of threat activity associated with a suspected Chinese APT dubbed Deep Panda, exploiting Log4j to then deploy a custom backdoor. Access was achieved via Log4j exploitation of vulnerable VMware Horizon servers, which then allowed the attacker to carry out subsequent malicious activity. CTR also identified Conti ransomware group recently exploiting Log4j, another exploit in just the group's evolving toolkit. And another reminder that we are likely to continue to see an emergence of threats and actors adopting this into their TTPs.
Very interesting. All right. Just quick note, we are taking questions through Twitter, LinkedIn, or whatever platform you're watching. Those are being collected, and we will answer them at the end of the show. So please drop your questions into the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. All right. A couple of other notable trends that we wanted to touch on. Wave browser. All right. So for those of you who don't know, that's a PUP, a potentially unwanted program. And it's often associated with search hijacking and adware. But we saw this come up in a lot of incidents, but it's just a PUP, right? Alexis, why am I concerned about just this little bitty commodity PUP?
Yeah, so the specific pub can be, associated with search hijacking and adware, and then so in one of our cases, there was like suspicious activity that started to occur after Wave browser was unintentionally installed, right? So the user themselves didn't realize that they were installing this in the background. The program proceeded to make unauthorized changes to those systems. So when you zoom out on pubs, right, they can be quite eye draining to your analysts. Like they're going through their consoles, they keep seeing this Wave browser pop up, and it's not associated with anything other than being potentially unwanted and annoying. So they're just pushing those alerts out until the day where it starts doing other things, right? Like making unauthorized changes onto those systems. So then it's like, oh, it was dismissed in their workflow, but now it's like more than just an annoying web browser installer. Nothing bad's going to happen here. No, there is bad stuff until something does happen. And like the browser playing a part in those unauthorized changes to the host, it did lead to a compromise on those machines. So of course, the takeaway here is users continuously need to be educated on safe browsing, as well as understanding those risks of drive-by downloads.
Awesome. All right, next topic, APT. All right, so we always say it's not an APT, but sometimes it's an APT. Hey, Caitlin, so we saw a couple of them. Let's first talk about Muddy Water, aka Static Kitten, aka Seed Worm. What a terrible name. All right, so we definitely have seen them around. So what are their typical targets? What are their typical TTPs?
Yeah, so Muddy Water is an advanced persistent threat actor that we've covered in various Talos blog posts, and a threat we've just continued to see from previous quarters. U.S. Cyber Command actually recently connected Muddy Water to Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security. I believe the group has been active since at least 2017, and they typically target organizations in the Middle East and neighboring regions, as well as high-value targets in countries in North America, Europe, Asia. Talos has been tracking Muddy Water campaigns that target private and government entities, so universities, think tanks, federal agencies, and other industry verticals as well, with the goal of stealing intellectual property and other proprietary information. Known TPs usually include the use of remote access tools such as Beyond Trust, remote support, remote desktop manager, along with various living off the land wool bins, to assist with the initial stages of the infection. In some of this activity, we observed Muddy Water deploy an open source reverse tunneling tool called Ligolo to help gain a greater degree of control over the infected endpoints. I believe Muddy Water campaigns primarily utilize malicious documents or maldocs with a variety of lures and deploy downloaders and rats.
Yep, that's a little scary, but also understood. All right, another APT that we saw this time was Mustang Panda, which I always want to call Mustang Sally. Like no matter how many times I say it, like that song will get stuck in my head. Mustang Panda, also known as Red Delta, we observed them loading payloads onto systems using USB drives. Lori, wait, USB drives are still a thing? Who has I don't even know if I have a USB drive. So to walk me through how this is still something that's happening in the enterprise.
So, in one of the cases we saw, a user had their personal machine infected, was unaware of it, and plugged in a USB drive to download some content that they wanted to share at work, some pictures, I think. When they plugged it into their personal device, it infected the drive, and then they brought it into work and plugged it into their corporate system, where it started propagating through that network. So the unfortunate thing is, without even if there is a policy in place, without locking this down in your group policy, this is definitely something that can easily happen. So make sure you're locking the external drives from being allowed to run or execute in your environment, because this was pretty widespread.
Yeah, and that is a security control that was recommended, I think in 1986 was probably the first time that came out. I don't know if USB drives or that was glib. But yeah, but it's something that I think, we we forgot about, right? It was like, oh yeah, that is still a thing. So make sure that as you are building your systems and you making sure that you're locking that down and not letting your USB drives right to your hardware, very important, or have local admin. So many steps you could take to avoid this. All right, so some of the other trends, obviously, phishing, it's still a thing. Phishing is going to be there. I don't know when that's going to come back, go away. Business email compromise, we're still seeing a lot of that. I don't think we can not mention Ukraine. The Russia-Ukraine war is, if you haven't noticed, it's still happening. So while we are obviously here to support our customers, and Talos is continually to observe a variety of threats and threat actors leveraging this war, we do cover that extensively in our Talos blog. Our general guidance, though, right now is just we're going to echo the recommendations from CISA Shields Up. So make sure that you are keeping up to date on those alerts. All right. Other things that we have in that report, our top weakness. All right, guys, this really hurts. It's still multi-factor authentication. Why? Why is this still a thing? Guys, it's really easy to put on multi-factor. And I know, like, oh, my users have to click something. There are a lot of ways to make this easy on your end users. And whether that's through leveraging SSO or something else, there's a way that you can make this happen. And also think about, what are you giving people access to your systems? We saw a lot third-party people who had third-party access being able to log into a Citrix environment without any sort of additional authentication. That is just opening up that hole, right? So let's get that in there. Make sure you have security awareness with your users about how to correctly leverage MFA. Like, we're not going to call you and ask for your code, those type of things, which we'll probably talk about in the next quarter, because that may be a forward trend. We don't know. All right. So that's our trends. For the additional information on that, like I said, please go to the blog and you can find all the additional information there. We are going to move on to our this is a brand new show, so I guess it's a new segment, but it's also going to be my favorite, I think. All right. We are calling this segment The Dumpster Fire. And I am giving somebody at CTIR 3 minutes to just go on a rant about whatever it is that is getting their goat. So, Lori, you are the lucky challenger today. So in 3 minutes, what's your dumpster fire?
Password resets. Oh my gosh. So yes, they're painful. We're going to recommend them in a lot of cases, an enterprise password reset. And I want to ask the crowd, have you thought about that? Has your team really sat down and thought, what does that entail? Because I don't think a lot of teams have that. It's not just, checking a box and the users have to reset their password. No, it's your domain admin accounts, your service accounts. Where are those living? A lot of cases, these teams don't really have a good handle on where those service accounts live, what they're doing, what will break if they change that password. And time is critical when you've got a threat actor bouncing around in your network. These are so critical to change quickly to help boot the bad guys out. And without a good plan in place, it can be really chaotic and really painful. And it doesn't have to be if you've got a plan in place. Putting something out there like Microsoft Labs that can easily handle all of your local admin passwords, getting those plans in place, who should have domain admin, who should have local admin, and kind of having that checklist and that plan ready can make it a lot less painful and really help save your bacon if you're attacked. So
absolutely a great dumpster fire. So yeah, when you're thinking about your containment and remediation plans, have you thought about how painful is it going to be if we have to do an enterprise password reset? And I think we often hear, we do that all the time. Like, you don't really. You reset some things. You don't reset your entire environment. So having a plan in place for that, I would recommend leveraging things like your BCDR, or your having that in your incident response plan and being prepared to do that in a way that is efficient and is not going to cause the most amount of pain for your users.
And I promise you, it's less painful than ransomware.
It is so much less painful than having to restore your system. Like, oh no. Like the same thing with multi-factor. Like, yes, it's painful. So is ransomware. Ransomware is very painful. Okay, so the next segment, this is all about me. Yay, we're talking. So if you don't know, jokingly, I am the InfoSec Mystic. I make predictions all the time. I do have a crystal ball. I actually don't have it with me. We plan to have a very pretty graphic that is blingy and stuff, and maybe we'll just like share it on Twitter. But my crystal ball, looking into it for the future, unpatched things will continue to be exploited. So that is the answer that it says. Yeah, frankly, the crystal ball is not, it doesn't have to be a genius. It just knows if you have an unpatched system, someone's going to exploit it, and Log4j isn't going away. So that is Liz's crystal ball. There's a sound. Okay, so one thing you'll highlight during this conversation is that Cisco Talos Incident Response, we're more than emergency response, right? That is our core bread and butter. It's what we're amazing at. We're also amazing at proactive services. So within our incident response retainer, you do get access to a number of proactive services, and one that we are going to highlight today is Intelligence on Demand, Intel on Demand. And Alexis and Caitlin, I believe you were going to take the cue on this.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. So our Intel on Demand engagement is sort of an opportunity for a customer to request additional information around most things in the threat intelligence space that Talos might know a thing or two about. So after we've agreed on terms with the customer for that Intel on Demand, most customers will decide to receive a debrief for a specific malware family, i.e. what does it do? What are some documented indicators of compromise associated with it? What's usually the end goal? Another big one that we do is deep and dark web searches, where a Talos intelligence researcher such as Caitlin uses a series of tools and workflows to consume customer inputs and produces a compilation of mentions of that X company on the deep and dark web. So malicious adversaries like to sell data. This is just one of the ways that they can do it. So with that in mind, Caitlin, what is some of the notable information types found on customers who engage Talos for a deep and dark web search?
Yeah, absolutely. So the goal here, so we want to understand the types of customer assets that might be advertised and offered for sale on various underground marketplaces or forums to give us an idea as to the malicious activity we may observe from those credentials being advertised. We usually ask for proprietary information and unique company details, so things like domains, emails, internal accounts, host names, IPs, data points that can suggest or indicate a suspected access or compromise, where Talos analysts will start from there to see if they identify any of that data discussed or offered for sale. So a search like this could lead us to find valid credentials that may have been scraped or harvested with a certain tool or malware. We see a variety of information stealers, such as Redline Stealer, used to obtain credentials, usernames and passwords, and advertise that access on forums. When we come across an advertisement like this, the date the advertisement was posted can also inform and help CTIR in dating back their analysis to search for signs of possible initial access or compromise. The other thing this type of search does is if we see an advertisement for customer accounts or data associated with an information stealer, this can also help us and provide more context on the possible compromise itself. By looking at like known TTPs for the given malware that the credentials may have been obtained through, which in turn then helps CTR's investigation efforts. So I think this kind of segues nicely to what I want to ask you, Alexis, which is what recommendations do you provide in the case that customer information is found via deep and dark web searches?
Yeah, of course. So I kind of want to touch first on that credential portion that you called out and pretty much, did a great job of explaining. But usually when we do run into findings, they are related to credentials or another form of gaining access into an organization. That's at least what they're claiming. Of course, they're out there like, hey, I have the keys to the kingdom of X, Y, and Z corporation. With that in mind, we really advocate for password resets on those named accounts, since the information could be relatively fresh in the market. Adversaries could be enticed to purchase the credentials and see where they end up getting within the customer's ecosystem. That's why it's crucial that these flags flagged accounts and domains have password resets pushed. There's also the question of where this information was sourced from, which you kind of got to as well. Does an adversary already have a foothold within your environment and pooled credentials to sell? Or was that an external collection of credentials, such as like through the employees filling out a form from a phishing link? So with that in mind, some of the other recommendations we might have there is feeding in for them to start doing searches or taking us in for a compromise assessment or a threat hunt, where we take the intelligence that you've already provided to us, Caitlin, and we try to see where maybe it came from, because what we found on the dark web just doesn't quite make sense that it came externally. It's probably from internal sources. So now let's chat about a different type of intel on demand engagement. So back to more general research of threat actors. What could a Talos threat researcher like yourself do for a customer request around a malware group overview that differentiates from a customer trying to do it themselves?
Yeah, so for these kinds of requests, we like to start with providing known TTPs and behaviors, so that's tactics, techniques, and procedures that are associated with a given malware family. So sometimes this may translate into providing TTPs with associated MITRE techniques that customers can then feed into their security products or solutions. What might differentiate Talos researchers running down this type of information from what the customer might do on their own is that we also track not only malware TTPs, artifacts, and behaviors reported through open source, but we also provide what we may have learned about a certain malware threat when observed in telemetry sources. So if it was seen in previous CTIR engagements. So this might include things if like recent detection coverage produced for this malware threat, or interesting insights, including times observed. So maybe there was observations of this malware spiking and affecting customers in a certain quarter more often than others, or specific sectors impacted targeted more often than others, or associated tooling that we've seen dropped in conjunction with this malware. So this can also help provide a more complete picture. Other information we can also provide from this intelligence is specific exploits or vulnerabilities that we may have observed this malware family leveraging in the past, or variations in which we have seen them establish initial access. So to give defenders kind of a better idea on what to look out for. So, you know, as we're talking about these kinds of requests, I'll kind of kick this back to you again, Alexis. What advice, kind of in general, do you give customers who want to incorporate findings from a CTIR intel on demand to supplement their in-house or other sourced intelligence?
Yeah, of course. So after you've given us all that good stuff, of course, and Caitlin, you and I have had our conversations on the back end as Talos to Talos talking about what's next. We help contextualize the findings from the intel on demand for the customer. So we host a discussion with the customer where we review what the intelligence could mean for them, right? Like threat intelligence isn't something that just grabs signature-based IOCs and proceeds to write up and say, hey, write up a couple of detections to block on that and then leave. No. Their intelligence is important for anyone who touches security. For example, your vulnerability management lead might be curious about what to prioritize for their monthly patching commitments. We've talked about patching a lot during this whole entire segment in this whole CTIR On Air, you know, because it's based on which exploits are being used within their industry too. Or a SOC manager is about to make their case on why they need to add some sort of tool to capture net flow, because with intelligence, this was demonstrated to be a great way for them to find adversary activity. Again, pretty much no decision in your cybersecurity function should be made without the input of threat intelligence. And with that being said, thank you again so much for chatting with us. I'd like to give Liz an opportunity to lead us into a Q&A portion with the audience.
Oh, what a great segue. You're a professional, Alexis. I love this. All right. So again, please drop your questions into whatever platform you're watching us on, and I'll just pull some of these. The first one I think we want to touch on was like, well, you know, if ransomware was 25% of what we saw, what's that remaining 75% about? And Caitlin, I'm going to throw this one at you. What were some of the other things we saw? And I think we talked about a lot of them.
Yeah, exactly. So ransomware comprised the majority of engagements or incidents observed, rather threats observed. But like we said, we saw sort of a notable spike in APT activity this quarter. Wave browser continues to affect customers. And then phishing and BEC, sometimes we'll see the initial infection vector established, phishing emails sent, and then just maybe not a lot of, subsequent malicious activity after that. But that just, those threats are kind of the main threats sort of observed this quarter, while ransomware just continues to just kind of be on top.
Okay. Awesome. So this one I'm going to throw at Lori. Be prepared, Lori. All right. So while multi-factor authentication is important, can we talk about some of the ways that bad actors are bypassing it?
So yeah, there's several ways. Obviously, one of them is if legacy authentication is enabled in your organization. Some of those older authentication protocols like POP, SMTP, et cetera, are they don't support or they can't enforce MFA. So it is a one entry point that the threat actors will tend to use. Another way is just through good old vishing and smishing, attempting to get the user to give up their token or their credential information into that environment. So,
can you define vishing and smishing?
Vishing. So that's the voice phishing, or when a threat actor calls and acts like they are somebody from your IT team or the finance department, trying to get you to perform an action that's not in your best interest. And smishing or SMS of phishing is when they are texting your users. I'm sure you've all seen those weird texts. Hey, this is your bank. Click here. Give me your account info. So that's one of just the other ways that they're trying to get around that.
Yeah, and I think another way is prompt bombing, which I love that term, which I also just call like initial vector by annoyance. And pretty much that'll be, somebody gets just 1,000 alerts on their phone asking them to authenticate into their MFA application or whatever that is, and eventually just say, yes, please stop. And we'll go ahead and click that. So we definitely have seen that coming through. But like Lori said, we are seeing an increase in social engineering to try and get around MFA. So make sure that you have educated your users, and there are also some other technological, is that a word? I don't know. So there are some other techie ways that you can use to help get around this. Okay, and I think our last question is also going to go to Caitlin, and the question is, have you played the 80s Dune board game? It recently got a re-release, different from the new version that also recently came out.
So yeah, that question is confusing a little bit, because I think there are a few new Dune board games. So yes, I've played one of them. New Year's a couple years ago. I lost miserably in both of those. I guess, I don't know. I play a lot of board games. I don't know if I'm good at playing board games. But yes, very, very interesting. I definitely recommend it.
All right. Well, thank you for answering that. And I think that will end us for today. If you are experiencing a security emergency, CTIR emergency experts are available 24 hours a day. You can call our hotline at 1-888-831-7715. Call us now. Or if you are in the European EMEA area, 44, that's a country code, 808-234-6353. Did you write that down? Cool. All right. And also always you can find us at talosintelligence.com/incident_response. Wow, that was a lot of things, but just go to talosintelligence.com and you can find us there. All right. I think if there is nothing else, I think we're going to wrap this up. Thank you everybody for joining this. If you would like to share this with friends, this will be posted on all the platforms, on the Twitters, on the LinkedIns. I don't think we actually have, you'll find it somewhere. All right. So cheers everybody, and CTIR is off air.